What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to FudgeMuppet. This is the Elder Scrolls podcast. My name is Scott, here with Michael and Drew, as always, and today we are discussing all about the dark arts of necromancy. That wasn't grammatically correct, but we are discussing the dark arts. Yes. Necromancy.
Necromancy is bringing somebody who is dead back to life. At least that is the most basic way of looking at it. There's all kinds of... The magical schools are arbitrary after all. Yeah. But it is considered by many to be a type of conjuration. Other people associate it with mysticism because that can involve similar elements. What are you giggling at, Scott?
Ever since I said the dark arts, I'm just constantly hearing
Snape?
like Snape's voice in my thing. I'm just hearing Potter. Anyway, so necromancy, manipulation of the soul seems to be a big part of it.
Of mortals specifically.
Yes, but there seems to be a little bit of weird crossover and stuff, which we'll get to. Like, there is some interesting definitions of necromancy, and also like necromancy in recent years, aka Skyrim, has been most closely associated with conjuration, but beforehand it was mysticism. And from a lore perspective, this makes a lot more sense when we go back to the history of necromancy and with Manamako on the Sigil Order, but we can get into that as we go, but we'll stick with the basics for a moment.
Yeah. So
surprisingly, it's pretty frowned upon.
Yes, it is. I mean, it does depend on what culture you come from, but generally speaking, pretty much all of the cultures frown upon necromancy, and it's hard to blame them because if you look at things, necromancers in general have caused societies all over Tamriel so much strife. Right, like you've got the Slowed, you've got Manamako, you've got Patima Wolf Queen, you've got there's more, Cameron, the Usurper. I didn't say him. There's a lot of necromancer bad guys who cause a lot of problem, and even just the very act of it itself. Right, you are bringing back somebody's family member or an ancestor who died back to life. We know that it can actually, it's not just bringing their body, it involves their soul, and can cause them a lot of pain and discomfort.
This is
no one would want anyone that they know who's dead to be tampered with.
And this is the thing, I guess, like I think we've talked about this maybe even a previous podcast, but there's a general idea about the ethics of it. But the big problem is distinguishing what's what, because there's ideas that the soul is somewhat tethered to the body, and that the longer the soul's been gone from the body, the less of a hold it has, or something like that.
The spiritual umbilicus concept. It's like tethered to the body, and there's a difference between a fresh corpse and a not so fresh corpse.
Because on just a strict example, if it was just, for instance, if it was just a dead person, and that conjuration was essentially, if you were essentially just animating the person and having them work for you, but there is no actual manipulation of their soul or something, you're just manipulating flesh, like functionally, like kind of like what flesh atronachs is, are in the necromantic versions, I guess, in Elder Scrolls Online, except they're stitched with multiple people, but.
Well, that's the thing. Even without talking about souls, you think about it, and it's like it's not going to go down too well, regardless. Because I feel like across all cultures, any mortal race has burial rites because it's essential for closure, regardless of what god you attribute it to, whether it be RK or any others. It's like it's important to have the bodies of your passed away loved ones either cremated or buried, so that you have that sense of closure where you don't have to see them. You don't want to see them again. You want to remember them.
But even now, like in even our modern society now, like obviously this is it's a cultural idea, but like for example, you can elect on your driver's license it says, they can take your organs and stuff if if you got healthy organs, which will benefit for someone else. And I think I have that on. It's like it's a relatively utilitarian thing. It's like I'm not going to use them anymore. You can take it. So in this sort of same sense, it's like imagine if your body, as long as you, the personhood, like the soul or whatever, wasn't suffering, it's like, you can use body for labor or something, so someone does it or whatever. But and I understand people's problems with it, but I'm just saying it's not an inherently moral, when you analyze it, other than people's emotional feelings about it.
But I think it is. I would argue that it is inherently immoral.
Why?
Well, because you are always tampering with somebody's soul.
Well, if you are, I'm saying under the pretense
before
that it's
but
not.
even
It's all I'm
just
trying
on
to
the physical,
establish.
even just on the physical level. So theoretically, what you're getting at is if a necromancer were to get permission from the dead person, like you can be a donor to a necromancer.
Yeah.
Then perhaps you can be, you know, even with the soul included, if you get permission, maybe that changes the morality of it.
Because otherwise, without permission, it does change it. Because and it's interesting you bring that up, Drew, because we'll come back to that with the Dunma's traditions. But you know, you really do need that permission. It's not like, oh, because there's no soul involved, it's not immoral. Like, I could die. It doesn't mean that someone can take my belongings because I don't need them. Like, maybe I wanted my belongings to be given to a museum or to a family member or something like that. It's not just like if you find it, you're allowed to tamper with it.
What about inheritance tax, bro? Is that immoral?
You know, but you know what I'm saying. Why does a random roaming necromancer get to decide what they're allowed to take and use and things like that? But it is interesting when you talk about permission, because you can look at the Dunmer traditions of actually bringing their ancestors back, which was seen by all other cultures as this, for a long time, as a kind of grotesque necromantic thing. Although the Dunmer hate necromancy, but they didn't see that as necromancy, bringing back an ancestor to help the family in times of trouble. And in a way, you could say that that's not unethical, because that family member would deem it worth the pain, because it hurts a spirit to come back into the mortal world. It's not a pleasant experience, at least according to various sources. So it would be worth it to them. And if I told you right now, you know, you could go through some pain. It's not going to kill you or ruin anything, but you're going to go through some pain right now to save your family. Of course, you would say yes. So, you know, you can say those practices aren't exactly unethical. And something similar could be said about, Scott, you might know more about this, but the ghost fence.
I was just about to bring up the ghost fence.
Yeah, that is kind of a necromantic thing.
Yeah.
Because these, you know, a lot of it was members of House Redoran, but you could basically, you know, like individual families can have a ghost fence to protect the spirits and the resting places of the family. Or in the case of the Blat, you had huge amounts of Dunmer sacrificing their spirits essentially to protect Vardenfell and Greater Morrowind from the ash storms or from the Blight.
Now, another interesting thing about necromancy as well is, in terms of it being moral or not when it comes down to its practice, is that in cultures where they really abhor necromancy and you can't do it at all, these are the cultures that suffer from necromancy because they don't really have the capabilities of defending against it, because they don't understand it. So you take Hammerfell, for example. They've had all kinds of problems with the Slode, who are extremely necromantic in a lot of their practices. But the Red Guards aren't, right? And so the Red Guards find them a hassle to deal with because of that. You know, they'll continue to bury their dead on islands like Stros Mackay and stuff, and the Slode will take advantage of that and turn the dead people into, you know, necromantic abominations. I mean, Red Guards really don't like it. You know, the Ansei wards, the sacrifices that were done to stop bodies from being prevented. There's that. There's also the Ashabar, the tribe of Red Guards who go around killing undead, but it's said that the Ashabar are actually disliked, even hated, by some of the Red Guard community, or by a substantial part of it, just for dealing with undead. Even though they're killing them, they're like, it is just so disgusting that you even touch or have anything to do with the undead, that I don't like you. And obviously that's a culture that's going to have problems with it. The Altmer in the Somerset Isles, obviously they do not like necromancy. It's said in one of the sources that they allow them. It doesn't really make sense when you think about it, because enchanting exists, I'm assuming. But they're like, oh, you can study necromancy, but you can't mess around with like soul manipulation and stuff. And it's like, well, okay.
Well, because there were efforts made. I mean, this kind of ties into the story of Vanis Galerian and Manamako, but there are examples of Sigic Order necromancers who've tried to make it an ethical thing, where it can you can perform necromancy in a way that is not inherently evil or unethical.
Can I ask you what's the explanation? Because I know there's a difference. What is the deal with Skyrim's necromancy? Whether that's in the same boat?
What do you mean compared to
So
like
gameplay or lore?
Yeah, for the gameplay reasons. Like I just because I swear I remember something about in terms of necromancy. Like there is almost a ethical level of necromancy because you're essentially just reanimating a body rather than attaching a soul to it.
So, okay, here's the thing. The sources contradict themselves. And, I mean, we could bring up that text from Elder Scrolls Online, which is very hard to find, but it talks about a minor Daedric essence used in the creation of, like bringing back a skeleton or a... can't remember the exact thing it was, but it was talking about flesh atronachs, but it kind of lumped it in with... like other necromantic things, even though as like we've discovered when we talked about flesh magic and I made the flesh magic video, they seemed separate before. Like in the Shivering Isles DLC, it seemed very separate. I'm just trying to find the text right now. I think it's by Phrastus of Ellen here, isn't it? Who, by the way, is kind of ridiculed in a lot of his texts.
He has an opinion on just about everything as well. There's so many texts.
Yeah.
But that's a weird thing about just lumping it in as a basic conjuration spell. It doesn't feel like it's something more serious than just a bit of magicka being used. So the lines get a bit
here it is.
hazy.
He goes, here are the general types of undead. The reanimated. These monstrosities are formed when a necromancer summons and instills an enslaved spirit, but that spirit is often a minor Daedric essence. So not always, but often. And I would say, I don't know about you, but I kind of feel like enslaving Daedra temporarily especially is not that bad.
Well, you can't really distinguish that from just normal conjuration where you just bind them and control them.
Exactly. So
it's kind of, if you're debating the ethics of that, like if you were to like raise a whole bunch of, say a war happened, a bunch of bodies died and you raise them to like, repair the town that just got destroyed or something with Daedra essences or whatever, that doesn't necessarily seem inherently unethical, I guess. If you treat Daedra as these, I don't care about Daedra rights.
Because you can go down that loop, you can go down that rabbit hole as well, can't you? But he says you instill this minor Daedric essence into a corpse or a construct of bodies. Reanimations take many shapes, from the lowly skeleton, favorite of novice necromancers, to the hulking flesh atronach. But again, I'm not a big fan of this because all of the other lore kind of revolves around this hatred towards necromancers because they are messing with the cycle of life and death and tormenting spirits. And, the
only thing I could say to that,
okay, go on.
That was just that. So, like, obviously, there's the cruel like punishment of a soul or something. It's inherent. There's bad stuff there because it's causing harm to others. But if there was ethical necromancy, even you can imagine people just purely on an emotional or cultural sense will just still be uncomfortable with it and think, "Oh, that's evil. That's disgusting." Even if it was ethical, because it's just a matter of perception.
I agree. It's the same reason that people don't really have a problem with enchantment. Enchantment is for the most part done with white souls, but there are a lot of things where I don't think they really mind.
Yeah, just for people out there, there's one area where necromancy gets a little like, confuddled as well, is when you've kind of got like black and white souls and this idea of like, if you're immortal or you're high enough, you've got a black soul and then you've got white souls. And I don't think this was the case in a previous, like black soul gems, I'm pretty sure was an invention from Oblivion. So obviously it's become a staple, but it feels kind of odd that there is this distinguishing element. Like, at what point does this, white soul become, like, what does a white grand soul become a black soul? Like, at what level of sentience or whatever does a giant have to get to qualify? And that's why I think a lot of this is within gameplay, terms and so on. It's to justify the gameplay mechanics more so than the lore, but obviously it's part of the lore now, so you have to kind of, deal with it. But I just think it's one of those funny things with necromancy that kind of mixes it up in the same way that conjuration and mysticism, like, it makes more sense with, from a lore context. It's relation to mysticism because mysticism has a lot to do with manipulating spirit and the soul in general as a practice. But yeah,
I mean, because I'm not sure. Go on.
Oh no, you go because mine's longer.
I feel like mine.
Okay.
Okay. Well. All right. So
whip him
basically, I don't know if this is supposed to be the origin story for Black Soul Gems, but when I was talking about kind of the potential for ethical necromancy before, there's an Elder Scrolls Online character introduced, Vastari, who worked with Manamako for a little while, and it seems like it's written in a way that this is the initial origin of using black souls in the mortal realm, but they traveled to Cold Harbor where they found these black crystals, brought them back, and that's kind of the foundation of it, and she has tried to kind of modify them so that if you put a human soul in it, or an elven soul, whatever you want to call it, it's only there temporarily, and then it gets let to go to its afterlife, and you can't stop it at that point. So the idea was she was trying to create something that couldn't be used in a corrupt way by someone like Manamako. So I'm not sure if that's where
it's interesting too, because the idea in Oblivion was actually that they were creating black soul gems by putting them in this altar underneath the necromancer's moon, which is also another version of Manamako, who became a god in the Warp and the West, the whole dragon preg miracle of peace stuff. But so it was kind of like Manamako was the god of worms sort of. Manamako was making the soul gems, or like blessing it. That's, you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's another explanation.
I was gonna say, just to touch on the spiritual umbilicus a bit. Basically, it says the longer a body remains inanimate, the less hold its original owner has on the corpse. A spirit can stay tied to its remains for days, weeks, or even years. The shorter the time, the more likely the spiritual umbilicus exists. So, in a way, if we take this to be true, you are reanimating the spirit of the person who has, fallen, that you're trying to resurrect the body of. And in the case of Skyrim, where it's fresh, I mean, you kill them, you reanimate them. So in that way, it's evil. I mean, it is weird you find bandits in tombs that have supposedly been there for ages and they're not rotted at all, but...
Here's an interesting moral conundrum. So obviously the part like there is like, that person in Skyrim, that bandit or whatever, isn't like consenting to being reanimated. However, when you deal with crime, like obviously prisoners aren't consenting to being locked away in this prison or forced labor or whatever they're doing. So at what level do you actually overtake that? So for example, is it like unethical inherently for, say, there's all these murderers and such, and say that you you kill them and whatnot, and then you reanimate them as labor to maybe serve the victims of the family's victims or something in their labor, like, you know what I mean? So
it just gets very slippery slope, because it becomes like who decides what's a righteous cause and what's worth resurrecting the dead and who deserves what and things like that. It's just kind of like, it's a bit but it is interesting. I feel like the other thing, and it is weird, but it says that the spirit can be attached for years even. So how do you know at what point it's if you think that just resurrecting a body is ethical, which I'd say it's not, but obviously it's more ethical than tormenting a soul. At what point do you know that it's safe to start doing that? Because the text says, okay, you go, what?
I was just going to say, surely there is some kind of spell that can be like detect spirit or some shit
I'm sure.
I'm sure. To like determine that.
It says a wise necromancer does not wish to fight for control of his creation with an angry spirit seeking a way back into the world. Best to be certain all of a creature's soul has departed before reanimation begins. Even should the necromancer win the battle, it is a cruel victory, tormenting a spirit on its way to rest. Raising the dead so recent that the soul has not yet fled is ill-advised, as true resurrection is not in the purview of the necromancer, but something best left to gods and priests. Okay.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's another confusing thing, is that isn't it also like just as possible to take a corpse and just apply a spirit that has no connection to this corpse, and that you can perform necromancy that way as well? So it's a soul that has no place in that body.
You probably could, but I would argue that would be still unethical, right? Like, it's just a randomly selected person's soul.
Well, no, yeah, it's but what if you even worse?
Yeah.
But
however,
then does it just become enchanting?
But however, but then it's kind of, you get down the thing, like, is enchanting unethical then?
But you're not taking random souls from nowhere when you enchant.
No, but like, what if I kill a bandit, capture their soul, enchant a sword? Is that unethical? Versus
probably it probably is. It's just like you don't think of it like that.
For sure.
it's the ultimate flex, you know. Instead of jewelry, like my jewelry is worth this much. It's like, dude, this necklace has a dead person's soul in it, and they're trapped in here, and they're a powerful soul. And
you look into the little gemstone, and there's he's like, help, help, like banging on it, and you're like,
yeah, you know. I just real quick question: what the heck does this mean in the book that I'm reading from? It's called On Necromancy, by the way, but it says, that last sentence, as true resurrection is not in the purview of the necromancer, but something best left to gods and priests. True resurrection is.
So I think they mean it's like
do?
Well, yeah, you know, imagine some like, I don't know, some like priest, like classic resurrection, like working through a god, like a god working through the priest. Sorry.
Magic.
Yeah, but in the way that you're giving someone life back, but it's not like you're not an undead, you're an actual real life back. So like
restoration CPR, basically.
Yeah, but I guess being dead already. So, you know, like just think of like holy, like, you know, miracle resurrections as opposed to some Frankenstein vibe thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Pretty weird.
So could you say that the soul was on its way with Kanafi to the afterlife, and then it's been dragged back down with the rest?
The priest is interfering with the cycle.
Is that unethical?
I mean, it could be. If, you know,
what if he consented to suicide, killed himself, and the priest like, no, we can't do this. And then brings him back with a god.
I just imagine The Incredibles with the guys jumping off the building and he gets stopped halfway down.
But does the god's morality or like, you know, his agency supersede that of the individual who killed themselves?
I don't know. You get tricky because then you say, is restoration magic in general unethical if you're interfering?
I try and err on the sides of like, let things be like, to just got like ethicals. Like, I don't know. It purely just through a cultural lens of like, I mean, if it's outside of the soul, that a body is like is manipulating that is unethical.
Yes.
Or like using in the same way, like, because you know, it's like like cannibalism for the wood elves, is that inherently, you know, because they say they eat all the dead and whatnot, is that inherently unethical? Well, it's definitely not to them. And then if you actually look at it, is anyone actually undergoing any like intense pain or anything? It's like, no, the soul's gone, the body's just there. It's either going to decay, get eaten by another creature, or eaten by them in their philosophy. So it's like it doesn't become inherently ethical because of that. Because obviously all ethics and morality are like culturally based.
It's all subjective.
They're all culturally.
It's funny. Speaking of the Bosma, apparently, I've heard that necromancy is not so common in Valenwood because they eat the corpses. I've heard mixed accounts though. One account is saying that there was a necromancer in Valenwood and a bunch of Bosma kind of stumbled across him, but they kind of laughed at the sight of seeing, like, they have a sense of humor about it and found it interesting to see the reanimated doing like labor tasks and stuff and being put to use. But then there's another source that talks about necromancers basically being killed on sight or something by Bosmas. Look, they're all individuals. They can have their own takes.
Same with the Khajiit. It's to say, while the forests of elsewhere pose some same problems of black marsh, like the, you know, preserving the deserts preserve corpses for hundreds of years in a way that requires little preparation. Khajiit of the desert tribes are often buried with only a small cairn of stones, which are easy to find and uncover. The Khajiit show remarkably enlightened indifference to graves being uncovered. It is said in the port of Central, one may purchase anything one desires.
Yeah, Khajiit are one of the most tolerant. Like I said, most aren't. Khajiit are quite tolerant of necromancy, supposedly. But I think, like any civilization, nobody wants necromancy to be a problem for them, right? So if undead hordes start pouring into their city, I don't think they'd be a fan. You know, city Khajiit aren't going to be too upset to know that off in the desert somewhere, some, you know, Khajiit that was buried there got resurrected. It's kind of like, okay, not my problem.
Yeah, it's just to think about the benefits. Like, that's what's most interesting to me with the necromancy.
You're a true Dunmer, aren't you? Well, not a Dunmer, you're a Slode.
No. A Dunmer would be very against it. No, but it's not that, because it's you're not doing it in a way to, the specific is not to, it's a utilitarian gain, not you're not trying to torture. Like, obviously, like I was saying, if it's causing pain and suffering,
Telvanni do necromancy. But they apparently, I've heard the Telvanni won't take a Dunmer's body to do it.
Yeah, because they don't, it's the same reason they don't really enslave Dunmer either, because they see Dunmer as above.
Although there are Dunmer slaves.
Are there?
Yeah, I don't know if the Telvanni own them, but there are Dunmer can be slaves, 100%. Because I found it by accident when I was looking at the iceberg theory for Hist Dunmer slaves, like just typing in Dunmer slaves.
Like slaves in Morrowind, or
Let me find it.
Perhaps that's a fate for bad, for criminals or something.
perhaps, yeah. But that's the kind of thing with criminals and stuff. It's the kind of thing. It's like, like you see, you could say that there's a net ethical gain almost if for example, like bunch of bandits come and then they burn this whole village down. They kill and pillage and do horrible stuff, resurrect them, and then they have to rebuild the village. It's like almost like a reparation type thing. That's almost like a fair thing. And maybe they're even relinquished after the period of where their undead bodies rebuild the entire thing, basically,
Yeah, there are Dunmer slaves, by the way. I just checked.
In Morrowind?
Yep.
I can't even remember them.
I don't know if it's Morrowind quests, Morrowind, Hlalu Stronghold, Zainab Nerevarine.
I think, to put it simply, it wouldn't be a problem if it wasn't for the spirit, because every culture has a different way of dealing with dead bodies. They have their own burial rites. But when it comes to the spirit, that's kind of like when it leaves the hands of mortals, and it's when the spirit is in the god's hands at that point. And it's like, can anybody, unless you're a god, say what we can do with the spirits of, past mortals who have made their way to the afterlife?
Isn't the god's only authority is the fact that they can manipulate the souls and bring them to the afterlife?
And also that they're just more powerful beings from the start
like
of time.
Like, they don't necessarily have any inherently, like, outside of a cultural view, they don't have any inherent, like, ethical grounds to assert power over.
To me, I feel like that perfectly sums up why that's the case. The idea is that we mortals give up their right to control the spirit. Once the spirit dies, it's in the hands of the gods at that point. It's why I imagine with the Khajiit, because they're so obsessed with the idea that you fly on Kanafi's breath beyond the moons to the sands behind the stars. If you've buried a Khajiit in the desert and their spirit has already followed the path, then they're probably not really going to care what happens to some meat and fur as much. But it's when the spirit's involved. If the spirit is going to be dragged back down to earth, then the problem comes along.
It's interesting to consider Skyrim and necromancy, isn't it? Because Skyrim, obviously, as we know, is covered in snow. Perhaps there should have been more snow, but snow is really good at preserving bodies. So you'd have a lot of necromancers there, as much as the locals hate magic.
Well, but you do find a few when you play Skyrim.
Exactly.
Like, there's quite a few.
There are quite a few. And you can also consider as well ancient Skyrim, right? So you think about the dragon priests and the dragon cult. In a way, they did kind of necromantic things, right?
Yeah. Well, they've kind of ended up becoming kind of like...
They became batteries.
Yeah, pretty much. That's all. The Draga became servants of the dragon priest to sort of sustain them in undeath, and bits of their like soul energy feeds them, because they're supposed to awake from their crypts and then go to the dragon priest and sort of, feed them breakfast. But that's a very it seems like a dragon power related type thing that the dragon priests have got via the dragons.
Yeah, it's just I just imagine that Skyrim is a candy shop for necromancers.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, just on the Draga note, it's interesting if people didn't know, but Draga before the time of Skyrim were actually supposed to be cursed individuals who engaged in cannibalism and then were cursed to become, much closer to, I'm pretty sure it's much closer to the real mythology of Draga.
Probably.
And Viking stuff. So they weren't the dragon cult related things, but...
If Elder Scrolls 6 does feature High Rock in some sort of way, necromancers could be found a lot there, because High Rock is a very violent place. So there's no shortage of conflicts and bodies and stuff, even though necromancers are hated there. There was also a illegal necromancy kind of trading thing going on in the sewers beneath Wayrest, which is...
Well, here's an interesting thing about and like how people necromancy is an interesting type of magic because it like you can see a lot of interesting cultural views of it, and it makes each sort of cultural tradition kind of stand out. But there's a passage here in the corpse preparation book. In my native High Rock, traditions dating back to the witch kings and nomadic horsemen mandate cremation of the dead. This is practiced almost without exception in the north.
Yeah,
yada yada.
But that's a north thing. So there's a separation between north and south. So North High Rock having cremation and the south burying their bodies.
Yeah, but it's a cool idea that like cremation arising as a practice to avoid necromancy. You know what I mean? It's interesting.
It is cool. I'll just read a little bit here from a video that I made a while ago about necromancy being evil, and I talk about High Rock and. Think about how much they would hate it. They've suffered from the Cameron usurper, like the Wood Elves. And although the Baron Orthrok finally defeated him and the Undead Army in the Third Era, in the Second Era, they had problems with necromancers and Breton noble cemeteries being defiled as necromancers were trying to corrupt Glenumbra. And there was also necromancers trafficking bodies on the island of Betnik. There was just a lot of stuff with High Rock and necromancer trouble.
Yeah. Well, while we're talking about like ethical,
could I just jump in real quick and say one of the other ethical things about it is, according to mages, some mages and people who actually have experience with it, and part of the reason why you could say it is unethical is because they reckon it's inherently corrupting. Like it has a corrupting
so like basically
effect on
slippery
the user.
slope. Yeah.
But almost in a
Kind of.
magical way, not just like this is enjoyable or fun or something, but almost a kind of magical corrupting, like the Sith.
I wonder how
powers.
much of that's grounded in reality, though, or versus it's a people's interpretation of just the sort of slippery slope. Oh, they'll do that, and then they'll push ethical boundaries to go further.
I mean, if we just look at what we can see, and I know it's just game presentation, but how many non-hostile, lovely, nice necromancers have you met? They're always bad. They're always bad dudes.
Yeah, but it's because they're creating an enemy type for a thing. But
the only example is Vastari, who I brought up before. That's pretty much the only example.
I mean, there's also like, Phineas, Gestor, and so on, and characters in the College of Winterhold that are like, oh, necromancy is not forbidden. Everyone in the Mages Guild prior to Hannibal Traven's outlawing of necromancy as well. Like, it's not just... it's obviously what the game represents to one thing, but, like...
Plus, part of it comes down to Vanis Galerian's kind of obsession with making sure no necromancy is ever carried out.
The only thing...
anywhere the Mages Guild operates, there's no necromancy.
The one thing with the necromancy thing being, like, inherently evil or corrupting, I just find a bit... memey. It's a bit like it's not. This isn't Star Wars in the way it's like there isn't a dark side kind of thing. Like you see a lot of characters use different kinds of magic and applications, and I feel like it's not very. Elder Scrolls doesn't really have or seem to have like a universal ethical truth.
I mean, you could look at it a bit like decriminalization in a way. Like if you make drugs illegal, the people who take and use drugs tend to be the kind of people who don't mind breaking the law, are more prone to taking risks, and certain crowd, right? Like I'm not here to make too many hot takes or statements, but you can imagine a similar thing. Whereas if necromancy is same as drugs, you could say if certain soft drugs were legal, more people who would never take it would try it, and you would have more. I don't want to say more normal people, but like, you know what I'm saying?
There's more chance of creating evil necromancers.
That's kind of what I'm getting at. If you make it illegal, the kind of people who take it on.
But do you know has that kind of thing where it's like things like seem like forbidden and people are drawn to it and will like go after it? Like if it was this heavily regulated thing, like it was in the Mages Guild.
That's kind of my point, is like when you have something that's taboo and illegal, you'll attract people who are okay with doing the wrong thing by the system, and also things that are taboo and
wait, if it is illegal or illegal?
Illegal.
Yeah, but when the Mages Guild made it, when it was being legal for Mages Guild history,
you would
Traven.
You would have more normal people. What I'm saying is that banning it can make it worse.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah. I see what you mean. Yeah.
The idea that it's corrupting is kind of like self-fulfilling as well, because people who are willing to abuse necromancy are going to become more powerful, substantial necromancers who are more likely to be, affecting larger groups of people and becoming well known for their bad deeds. Whereas a necromancer who does things really by the book, and if there's a book for it, but who are very cautious about where they dip their toes, they're not really going to be causing a big scene.
Exactly.
So when the bad ones rise to the surface.
Exactly. So when you ban necromancy, they go, okay, I'm a nice person with balanced interests, and I'm just going to do destruction instead, right? No, but seriously, or conjuration or something else. But it's the obsessed who fall into it and continue to do it when it's outlawed.
But couldn't you make similar sort of things just with like any fire mage? Like, I think the biggest thing is the cultural look at it. Like a fire mage who gets good and they get setting things on fire, like any like pyromaniac, and then they get bigger and bigger and they're more destructive, and they're it's cooler and cooler.
You could, but what I'm saying is
why the slippery slope.
The percentage of people,
fallacy.
It's the percentage of people who will do it. So if you made fire magic illegal, the people who do it, the percent of people who do it that are manic about it would increase. Versus if everyone can do it, the percentage of manic people, it might be the same amount of people, but the percent is less. So you run into less manic over-the-top fire users. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So there is that to consider. I mean, you could think about it quite heavily with illusion magic. I mean, that's a pretty corrupting, slippery slope sounding thing. Mind control. Imagine making mind control illegal. The kind of people who pursue it, they desperately want to control people, and they're probably going to do some unethical things. So that is an interesting way of looking at it.
To be honest, everything in an Elder Scrolls universe, like lore and sort of any legal kind of codes and stuff, would be so different to ours, just because they have to account for so many variables because of magic, and there would be so many, because magic's such a broad scope of things. You can kind of there's always going to be niches that aren't covered by the law, and it's hard to kind of regulate. Well, I guess that's part of the reason the Mages Guild and stuff exists in the first place, is to bring magic to everyone and regulate it and teach it in the forms, which also links back to what Michael, you were saying in the Magic Explained video a while back, that it's actually putting them into schools of magic is limiting in terms of creativity or whatever with spells and so on. But that actually serves the purpose of codifying and limiting what people are learning, and kind of, if you know what I mean, if you sort of narrow what people are learning, it's easier to control and regulate it and understand it all, as opposed to some big crazy chaotic kind of system.
It is interesting. I mean, I still feel like necromancy as we know it is evil. I just think that potentially you can find some loopholes to be well, there's this one technical way where it's not
I mean, I don't know if I would care if it was even my body, if it was literally my soul just goes off to the afterlife and I'm chill. I don't really care what happens afterwards. In the same, you could go, someone doesn't care when they just burn their body and they just go, I want to be cremated or whatever, or do you know what I mean?
So would you be down for being taxidermied and just put in the living room with the family forever?
Dude, if I was
striking a pose or something.
I mean, that's kind of
finger guns.
It's screwed up, but it's kind of funny almost. If I was a soul looking down from the afterlife or whatever, and then I'm they taxidermied me and I'm this. And
but let's be real. I think the three of us are somewhat more absurdist than the rest of the population, who probably would prefer that's not just because you don't mind doesn't mean that everyone else doesn't mind.
No, sure, but it's like I was saying, that's what I'm saying. It ultimately boils down to something that's cultural rather than any sort of measurable well, I mean, all ethics is moral and stuff, but I said, but everyone, that most societies will go unnecessary pain or torture or things like that are bad. People harming others as a general rule. Usually features as
it's massively disrespectful to the person's relatives who are still living, I would say. But
it's only disrespectful if it's in their culture. As in the Khajiit, they don't care. They don't. No, but it doesn't bother.
They don't care that it's someone out in the desert. It didn't say. I just can't imagine.
But no, there's the desert tribes. They're people. This is what I'm saying. There's desert tribes. They seem. Well, what's the quote? I don't know.
Otherwise, they'd be making rugs of each other if they didn't care at all.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it's a taboo, and it's always, like I said it right at the beginning of the video, the burial rites are essential to all finite beings, in that like families want closure, and that taboo exists in necromancy more than any other magic, even though, as we've said, magic can kind of be abused in general. Like if we had the same magic in the real world, as accessible in the real world as it is on Tamriel, then we would have destroyed ourselves thousands of years ago. We wouldn't be here. But it's different here.
It's funny, there's not too much. We haven't spoke about Argonians, our favorite race here at FudgeMuppet, especially Scott. We haven't really spoken about them, but from what I've heard, necromancy isn't too common there, just because bodies decay in the swamps, like really quickly. I know Argonians had problems with slowed at some point, or there were reports of slowed necromancers operating in Black Marsh, but only along the coasts. I wonder how that works with the Hist as well, because Argonians don't have souls. Well, it's different. Their souls are
remember
different.
they also have those bog blights that they had to pin dead Argonians under the swamp to stop them
coming back. It's
almost as if they're being, there's some like parasite in the swamp that gets into their brains, but I guess that reanimates them in a just corpse way. That's definitely not related to the soul.
Yeah,
I'd say if you argue Argonians have souls, but
All right. What else is there to say about necromancy? I mean, the other evil, association they've had is with different Daedric princes, obviously, like Molag Bal and the Aelids, are very fond of them, and they were fond of Daedric princes and making different deals, and they tend to be on the wrong side of history, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and it's usually because it's like at the same time, like Aelids were mad on slavery, so they didn't care. They just put all. It's like I don't imagine really Aelids doing it to their own people in the same way that Dunmer tend not to Telvanni use necromancy on other Dunmer, is because they see themselves as a separate personhood as opposed from the humans. The humans are beneath you, doesn't matter, because they treat you in the same way that you would treat an animal, because you wouldn't go, oh, resurrecting a mud crab is crazy unethical when you've just killed it to eat it or something like that. Well, some people might even argue that, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
There's obviously everyone culture draws a line, and they usually do it ascribed to as a non-personhood or,
This might be a bit loose because you could tie it into conjuration as well, but in some ways you could view it as unethical because it creates a risk to others. I know the Dead Thrall spell in Skyrim is very you can have a forever lasting reanimation, but in a lot of stories you hear that's actually not that impressive. Undead armies of hundreds of reanimations and things like that. And I feel when you play around with the dead, you don't really have control if you're a beginner, especially, and that can
perhaps
lead
but that's
to
like
problems.
anything.
That's what I was kind of getting at. Yeah, but I also
unless you were to go which is people argue this too, but power is inherently unethical. Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Because you could say that same as summoning something. If you go by the idea that you could summon a scamp and lose control of it, that would also be.
Yeah, but it's the same as if you could be playing with fire magic and then you end up burning down half of Rome.
That's
the same
that's
kind
what I say. I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You could say that.
So that's why I don't think that's one thing. Like I said, at the end of the day, I think the moral line really is about the torture of a soul or something, or denying them afterlife. You're denying a personhood, agency, and everything.
I mean, if you think about Skyrim, when you kill, this just adds to my idea that at least what you see in Skyrim and what most people think of with necromancy is evil. When you slay a reanimated target, they have dialogue lines like "at last" or "thank you," and it's kind of thank you for setting me free type thing, and they're freed from this torment that they have to suffer.
What was it again? Their spiritual umbilicus should be pretty strong because he only just killed them.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And also, various necromantic practices are unethical, like becoming a lich, where there's this process where they talk about you have to, on purpose, not just because you want to, for you to successfully become a lich, extract souls from a group of targets in the most painful way possible to harness their energy. Lichdom's no joke.
I don't think you can justify lichdom.
No, you can't. I'm So you'll need a magical relic of great power and a whole bunch of living souls. Then using the relic as a casting focus, you have to unleash potent necromancy spells on the living subjects, wrenching their souls from their bodies in a ridiculously painful manner, intentionally excruciating, torn from their bodies in the most violent and torturous ways. Otherwise, you cannot ascend to lichdom. That's the vibe of it.
Yeah,
that's bad.
Yeah. Because Lich is a broad term in a way. Like, obviously, this is referring to the more specific kind of Manamarco Dark Necromancy Lich. But obviously, like, there's the, Dragon Priests are functionally a type of Lich, but they're sustained willingly, really, by their cultists, it seems.
I think
there's the Aelid Liches, but I mean, there's a good chance that they were like ancient Aelid Liches, though, sustained by like slaves and stuff unintentionally. I mean, the slaves didn't like it. That's what I meant.
Yeah, I'll just throw out fun fact. Orc corpses are among the most sought after for the durability of their skin and the strength of their bones.
I don't think it really says anything else on orcs specifically about how they
view necromancy. I mean, look, a might is right race probably doesn't like it.
Oh, I mean, in terms of like fighting it, sure, but I wonder how they actually feel about like. I mean, what I'm saying is I don't know if they'd have a particular taste for necromancers necessarily in terms of like.
They're pretty they want a good death and be.
I'm saying is they have no burial rites. They go out into the common ones, the tribal ones. They go out into the wilds until they get killed in the wild. Like, they obviously don't have a care for the body. I guess it's the soul thing. That's the biggest thing.
But anyone would want to get to the Ashen Forge.
You could say it about any kind of disrespectful thing done with a corpse, though. Like, if an orc's family member got killed and their corpse was there and someone picked it up and just, I don't know, danced with it, which is pretty messed up, but just danced with it. Like, oh, I'm not hurting anyone, I'm just dancing with it. Like, they'd be like, yeah, that's my whoever.
But I'm just saying you'd have a hard time to make... It's mean to the person, but I mean like like a higher ethical argument against... It's not... it depends what thing you're using for. Like, oh, who's suffering? It's like, is that entity suffering or whatever? You could argue that maybe like it upsets the family or something, so maybe in front of the family. But what I'm saying is if you come across a dead orc who was killed by 2 saber cats in a fight and resurrected it, I don't know. Well, like, it depends on the soul thing. Like, if it's the soul, then obviously you're delivering pain to the soul. But if not, if it's just a body... Otherwise, it's kind of gets to the point, like, is all transplants of organs or so on. Like, if, what is it unethical if you, take a, let's a giant, I guess giants, for example, they put, outside of mortal, I guess, for the purposes of like, black soul, white soul or whatnot. But, is taking a giant's toe on it unethical? Like, if it was treated more so as a mortal or, human heart or whatever.
Probably right. I mean, it's kind of seen as dicey in the games.
I mean, if I die in a car crash and I don't have a damaged organs, they'll take my organs and put them in someone else, and I don't know who the hell that other person is.
Yeah, but you chose that.
Yeah, I guess so.
I think everyone deserves that choice, I suppose.
Yeah,
I don't know, just that feeling. I mean, I've got the same thing as you. I think it's the default choice on your driver's license, but if someone doesn't, I'm kind of like, yeah, fair enough.
Surely it's not the default choice,
I think it is.
Because I have no idea.
Mate, your organs are up for grabs.
So what, if you want to drive, you inherently have to
No, you can
sacrifice your organs.
No, you can
unless you say otherwise.
It's on the form. Yeah, you tick no. I think it's one of those like auto opt-in things.
Because it's kind of messed up. When I'm thinking about passing my... Yeah, if I'm thinking about passing my driver's test, I'm not thinking about who's going to get my kidneys.
Because the main reason people don't is usually because of religious reasons. Is because body intact or whatever for the afterlife, or I don't know what happens if you're in a car crash and you're sort of
not intact
everywhere, not intact, but So it's usually religious reasons, because otherwise you can kind of go, it's like, well, I'm not going to need my heart, I'm dead. Like, they can still take my body and bury it or cremate it or whatever, or have whatever thing.
This is getting morbid, but I guess that's the topic of the podcast.
Yeah. I was about to say, it feels a bit morbid, doesn't it? Things got a bit dark. The dark arts are called that for a reason, aren't they?
Where does the ethical line draw for you guys in regards to Elder Scrolls on necromancy? Like, what is ethical necromancy? Like, where's the distinction of like basically like species essentially? So like, is resurrecting goblins or
goblins have actually used
Reeklings.
necromancy? Did you know that?
Yeah.
So
goblins or Reeklings or giants or. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you know how many it starts getting a really like hazy grey area, and outside of it, it kind of becomes like,
I mean, I personally
obviously
wouldn't be doing it at all.
Yeah, I mean, you can do. Yeah,
It's not like because I think it's like super. It's just I just know it wouldn't be my cup of tea if I was in Tamriel.
Yeah.
There'd be so many other cool things to do instead. And I always think that the problem with necromancy, even as a combat thing, is you are reliant on there already being something dead. Like you have to enter, even when you play Skyrim, if you're trying to play a pure necromancer from the get-go, I remember where bodies are. Like I know, I walk in Bleak Falls Barrows, there's 2 bandits there next to the locked chest, and I know there's a dead bandit at the start, and I'm gonna reanimate that one. Because otherwise you need to pair it with something else, don't you?
Because it's always interesting. I wonder how like some societies, like in even Elder Scrolls, could use it. Like obviously the problem is the tortured soul, but like almost as an alternative to slavery in way of like having like free labor essentially. Like basically if you can treat it as like a robot, like if you can make flesh automatons essentially. Like if you got rid of the flesh aspect and was a person made a robot to do your own bidding and whatnot, you wouldn't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if it's just changing it from like mechanical to organic, but yeah, like we keep saying, that the soul part, if that's involved, then that's the problem because then you're
but like
how
restricted are reanimated corpses? Like how much are they in control of themselves once reanimated? Because it is an unusual idea to be like, you're playing a character who's a bit of a battle mage, but it's necromancy and you just stab someone through the chest. And then moments after their death, you bring them back like, all right, mate, you're with me now.
Well, that's the other thing that's kind of unethical about it. You are controlling them to do whatever you want. It's not like you're, it's kind of like illusion mixed with messing with their soul.
Yeah, but then you could kind of, use that for like all illusion magic.
I mean, but I would argue illusion magic is unethical.
You could.
I mean, it's dude. If I asked you, is mind control unethical? You'd be like, yeah. Doesn't mean that I don't. I don't really feel like an evil character when I play an illusion.
I mean,
character,
it also too. Yeah.
If you imagine it for real, you'd be like, yeah, okay. But yeah. Anyway, I think that's all I've got to say on necromancy today. I don't know about you two.
I don't know if we covered. I mean, I feel like we've made videos and stuff on Manamarco and
I
stuff
think Manamarco can get his own podcast.
Yeah, probably could. But, you get the gist. Check out our videos on it.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for watching.
Ethical debate on necromancy.
Yeah, it's been a fun ethical discussion. And we will see you all next time for another podcast.
See you later.